Before I dig into some of the key themes that emerged from this year's survey, I did want to take a moment to consider how do the results really compare to what we saw last year. And, as I thought about this, a few things really kind of stood out to me. First, I would say this year compared to last, there was much greater variability in the kind of key agenda items or priorities that showed up on the survey. Not surprisingly, last year, the responses were really heavily dominated by the pandemic. Virtually every respondent talked to some degree about, how they were engaging in post-pandemic planning and really kind of trying to navigate through the pandemic. This year, there are certainly some key themes that show up consistently across companies, such as talent management. But even within these, we see much greater variability in the specific issues that were raised. For example, regarding talent, we saw companies talk about both kind of attracting and retaining talent, but also about things like capability building or kind of rethinking total rewards. So kind of broader array of different issues raised this year. A second related trend is that in this year's survey results, COVID-19 really kind of seemed to move from the forefront, where it was last year, to more of a kind of background or contextual issue. And this isn't to dismiss kind of the impact of the pandemic and the impact that it continues to have on the human capital challenges we face. And it's not to say that it doesn't feature in the results, because I think you'll see that it certainly does. But what we did notice is that markedly fewer of the companies really kind of talk specifically about navigating the pandemic, and more about kind of thinking about the post-pandemic reality of hybrid work, thinking about kind of how it's shaping other systems and processes within HR. And finally, as we would hope to see, is that in this year's survey, we saw a number of issues that were barely mentioned, or in some cases not even mentioned at all in last year's survey. So for example, we saw in this year a much greater focus on capability building, which isn't really surprising given the labor shortages and talent challenges that we're seeing. Companies kind of reinvesting or focusing more attention on reskilling or upskilling their current workforces. Similarly, we saw, as we'll talk about, a greater focus on kind of employee expectations and the kind of heightened activism that we're seeing on many fronts from both employees and stakeholders. So some kind of new issues and interesting issues emerging in this year's round of survey.